I'm Veronica Marshall at the Capitol. This week on Senate Spotlight, senators say it's not if artificial intelligence should be regulated in Minnesota, but how.
It's seeking to create a framework and put controls in place in regards to law enforcement or government using facial recognition technology.
They can predict which applicants may have a baby in the next 10 years and eliminate those applicants from the pool.
Senators share the guardrails they'd like to put in place before it's too late. Plus, a bipartisan bill that goes after dangerous deepfakes.
I cannot overstate the damage this technology has done.
Why are these companies allowed to profit from this? Why do they have no liability?
The details on Senate File 1119 and where it is now. That's coming up.
Senate Spotlight is produced by the Minnesota Senate and Senate Media Services.
Research finds that states are one of the entities that can benefit the most from certain types of artificial intelligence, like generative AI that can draft communications or help users find information. AI is also a tool that can help government agencies work more efficiently and creatively. So the excitement around the technological leap forward is real. However, with AI's ability to automate some tasks, the threat of job loss is also real. And AI has already spurred debates around privacy concerns, civil liberties, and intellectual property rights. Here to talk me through AI's place in Minnesota now and in the future is the chair of the Senate's Labor Committee, DFL Senator Jen McEwen. Senator, welcome to Senate Spotlight.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. So everyone says AI is here. What does that mean? What does it look like? How prevalent is it?
That's an excellent question, and then one of the questions we posed in a recent committee hearing that we had in the Senate Labor Committee was walk us through, experts and workers, how much AI is already being used in our economy, how is it being used, and we heard the experts delineate between the description of what generative AI is, where it actually you're using that artificial intelligence to come up with new things on its own. It's programmed to do that. And then talking about also the AI that has already been in place that it doesn't necessarily generate things on its own, but spits out what it has been programmed to do. Yeah, so I think that it is. We're already seeing also the data centers that have popped up, and one is being built right now in Minnesota. There's a number of other proposals to build additional data centers in Minnesota, and they already exist around the country. We've also seen testimony from workers even last year here in Minnesota, workers who worked in an Amazon warehouse. We had a bill to provide some guardrails and protections for those workers, but they testified to having algorithms that were presented by the company, by Amazon, that would tell them what their work quota is and what the expectation is, but those algorithms would constantly be adjusted and changed at random times that the workers didn't know when those changes would occur, what the changes would be, so the expectation for their performance on the job was constantly changing and shifting. So when we hear these horror stories of Amazon workers at warehouses, not being able to take bathroom breaks, for example, and having to urinate in a bottle, or horrible instances like that, it goes back to that sort of concern that those workers had, where it was an algorithm that had been programmed to direct their work and to tell them, give them kind of feedback on how it thought that they were doing at any given time. But extremely stressful situations. Some of those applications are like the one I just described, and some of them are very helpful to many people. So it is already happening. It's already being used in workplaces, and we're seeing more and more that employers are going to be using it to select applicants, to screen people, to determine, to make decisions in their own businesses. And so it's important we get out in front of it.
You mentioned some of the concerns in the workplace. Another big concern with AI is our ability to determine fact and fiction. And we know that AI can spread misinformation or increase division. How do we counter that, either as a state or as consumers?
Well, I think that we can curtail that by actually explicitly passing laws in the state of Minnesota, like against deepfakes, for example, which we have, and there's a number of pieces of legislation sort of being considered right now and in the pipeline around this, just to actually prohibit certain uses of AI, and that would include sort of those pieces where people are being lied to, and to not have the information that this is AI, this is a generated image that is not real, then people, our whole sense of reality comes into question if we don't have the information we need to be able to evaluate what we're seeing.
You mentioned that you had heard the testimony in the Labor Committee for and against regulating AI. What were your big takeaways from that meeting?
I think my big takeaways actually were not so much that it was a for or against regulation, but a real bipartisan recognition that there does need to be regulation in this area. Maybe some disagreement as to the strength of those regulations, what form they would take, who and what they would be directed to protect or prevent, what behaviors we're looking to provide guardrails for. But in general, I came away from our hearing, which is posted online if people want to go watch it. It was very interesting. They had experts, workers, many people talking about AI, how it's already affecting them, and their thoughts about recommendations going forward. So it did feel to me from that hearing and hearing my colleagues, the different comments people had, was a recognition that there does need to be guardrails in this area, because it is it's appropriate to protect workers, to protect Minnesotans, to protect our environment from this new technology that can be manipulated and used in a way to exploit all of those things.
Now, is there a concern that if we put these guardrails in place, that companies won't want to be here because it will curtail their profits?
I'm not concerned about that. From what I understand, in Minnesota, we have a sort of perfect mix of the kinds of resources that these companies are looking for in where they want to set up their data centers in particular. I think that it is actually the duty of elected officials and the duty of our business community as well, business leaders here in Minnesota, to step up and to put those guardrails in place. Because what I would argue is that, in some quarters of corporate America, we do see a tendency to want to race to the bottom in the name of profits. We do see that. But not all corporate leadership is devoted to that. They do see the value of having a workforce that has an excellent quality of life. They do see the advantages of living and operating within a community that has a good quality of life, clean environment, clean water, people that are thriving in their lives, that is for them good for business as well. And I would argue that is good for business ultimately. But I think here in Minnesota, we do want to attract those types of companies, but we certainly are not looking to engage in a race to the bottom, where we are trying to entice companies that are going to take and not give back.
Yeah, it sounds like you mentioned a lot of Minnesota values there. So how much impact can the state have when it comes to regulating these things in the absence of federal regulations?
There's a lot that we can do. I mean, one of the big pieces that is being debated right now hotly at the Capitol are the data centers, and some senators and representatives have ideas around how to sort of entice these businesses through tax benefits. I've received scores of emails from constituents and people throughout the state opposed to that idea, which I am also opposed to that idea. I don't think, we're not giving tax breaks to small businesses. This is not that type of situation. These are billionaires that have more than enough resources to set up here and do business here in a responsible way. So they should do that, and that'd be great, and we can welcome them in doing that. But we don't have to undercut the well-being of our people and our environment to do that. So right now, data centers, very hotly debated. In the Labor Committee, we also, as I said, heard a lot of testimony about the ways that this technology could be used going forward. One of the ones that I think is a little bit concerning to me is how AI can be used by employers to, for example, screen out potential applicants. We heard an example of there could be an algorithm that could look at applicants for a job, and just by doing a sort of background internet analysis of those applicants, they can predict which applicants may have a baby in the next 10 years and eliminate those applicants from the pool just to start. And so what is really needed is a lot of transparency around how these algorithms are put together, what inputs are being added, so that we can understand the evaluation that they're making and make sure that it is actually a lawful one that we're okay with. So a lot of pieces around transparency, and then the other big piece is concern around employers who want to engage in union busting from the get-go. We already know that that's a problem in workplaces throughout the country. Here in Minnesota, we have a higher percentage of workers that are organized and do engage in collective bargaining through a union and come together with their coworkers in a union. And I think that has boded well in Minnesota for our quality of life relative to other states in the United States. But there is a real concern that employers could also use these algorithms to screen out people who they determine would be more probably involved in trying to come together with other coworkers and organize, for example. And it all goes back again to that profit motive, right? If an employer sees their employees coming together and unionizing as a blow to their profit and something that they're going to fight rather than welcome, then they could use this AI in very destructive ways to try to prevent that from happening.
Senator, we've gone through a lot of the fears surrounding AI, but let's talk about the positives or the promise of AI. You know, what could it do well here in Minnesota?
Well, one of the things that we heard, and this goes back to the idea around transparency, is that AI can be used to make working people's lives better in the workplace. It can get rid of menial tasks, things that it can free up more time for creative work, for that like real human element of what people are doing in their work. So that it really is, if that's allowed to happen, if workers are actually able to engage in the adoption of AI, so what the AI is doing and how it's doing what it's doing, so that they're able to approve or disapprove of the way that the employer wants to use the AI, then actually it could be a boon for working people, whether they're working on a factory line or they're doing creative work or teaching or whatever in the medical fields and the trades. There's a lot of different applications for AI that could make the experience on the job just a more fulfilling experience, but it really goes back to that transparency from the employer about the type of AI that they're going to employ and the way it's going to be employed, and also making sure that employees have that agency and that ability to say, this type of thing would work well for me, this type of thing would just be a way to make me work harder and faster and longer, and it wouldn't actually improve my experience on the job. So as long as it's transparent and we're working together in community to try to figure out the best use for this technology, I think it could be actually very wonderful.
Senator, any final thoughts?
Thank you for looking into this subject. I encourage people to go watch the hearing that we had in the Senate Labor Committee. It's posted on our official Facebook page for my office if people want to go take a look, and it's also on YouTube. But yeah, I hope people will keep up on this. We're going to have a push, if not this session, perhaps next session, to form a type of collaborative working group at the legislature or through the legislative process to really take a deep dive into the application of AI and the way that it affects our workforce. So the hope is to have a sort of panel of legislators, workers, people in tech, experts who can come together and really identify for the legislature which guardrails are needed so that we can implement effective policy for the people of our state.
Senator, thank you for the great discussion.
Thank you very much for having me.
Minnesotans hurt by AI came to the Capitol to share their stories and show their support for a bill that would regulate deepfake pornography. DFL Senator Jen McEwen's bipartisan bill, Senate File 1119, would penalize companies that allow users to nudify pictures using generative AI.
I have never taken nude pictures or exchanged nudes with anybody. But because of this easily accessible website, there are convincing graphic images and pornographic videos on the internet of me forever.
We want companies to turn this function off so it is not accessible in the state of Minnesota, so Minnesotans can't do this to each other.
The Senate's Judiciary and Public Safety Committee heard the bill and is holding on to it for now.
When it comes to AI, striking the balance between privacy and civil liberties and supporting innovation and needed change is difficult. My next guest is Republican Senator Eric Lucero, who is navigating the space around progress and protections with his bill, Senate File 1242, also known as the Facial Recognition Technology Warrant Act of 2025. Senator, thank you for being here.
Thanks for inviting me back. It's always an honor to have conversations relating to aspects of life that are impacting Minnesotans, such as artificial intelligence.
And in honor of your return, I have my Senator Lucero jacket ready to go. So let us begin. Let's start with something basic, Senator. How would you describe AI for those who are a little more unfamiliar with the term?
Absolutely. So artificial intelligence is what AI stands for. And artificial intelligence is a series of algorithms seeking to mimic human thinking, human reasoning, dynamically adapting to situations and trying to problem solve. And a key word is mimic, because it's not a replacement for human thinking, but trying to come as close as possible to mimicking human behavior and reasoning and thinking.
Right, it's making me think Terminator, Skynet. We're not there yet, but it's attempting.
Yes.
So along those lines, you introduced Senate File 1242, which is also known as the Facial Recognition Technology Warrant Act of 2025. Talk me through that. What inspired you to create it, and what is it hoping to accomplish?
So as a technologist myself, that's what I've been doing for over 20 years now, is in the space of cybersecurity, but technology more broadly. One of the things that I've been trying to have conversations my entire time in the legislature is the application of technology, whether it be in the private sector or the public sector, and how those are having implications and what kind of controls the government needs to put in place to protect citizens, to protect privacy, to protect rights and civil liberties. And so when it comes to that bill specifically, that is just one aspect of applying technology. So facial recognition technology uses artificial intelligence in the application then of biometrically measuring a person's facial features and then doing something with that information. Now, the bill that you referenced, it's seeking to create a framework and put controls in place in regards to law enforcement or government using facial recognition technology for different aspects of surveillance. And so one of the things that I've seen over and over again in my time in the legislature is technology innovates, it gets used by various aspects of government, and then we in the legislature may not find out about it until several years after it's been in use. So whether, let's say, police body cams, or there are other aspects that it's really difficult to try to rein something in and put controls or limits in place, checks and balances, after it's been used. Automatic license plate readers is another example in my time. So this is my attempt, even though facial recognition technology is obviously out there, the bill is an attempt to put those controls in place to protect civil liberties and to have those checks and balances.
Now, you mentioned it's hard to rein it in once it's already been put in place. Do we know if that technology is already being used here in Minnesota? Or, what about private sector and government? How else are we using AI right now?
No, that's an excellent question. So one example in the private sector would be just this past summer. So summer of 2024, the Mall of America, right in our own backyard here in Minnesota, they announced the use of facial recognition technology at the mall. And so bipartisanly, myself and Senator Fateh, we issued a release expressing our concerns. And so that is an example of, is there express consent? Here are some of the rhetorical questions. Is there express consent given by those whose information is being collected? How is the information being stored? Is it being stored? What's the retention? How is it being deleted? Is it being shared with anybody? Is it being data mined? Is it being used in other purposes that are beyond again, somebody at the mall themselves. And so this example of the private sector harvesting biometric information without affirmative consent is red flags for those who are seeking to uphold data privacy and affirmative consent when it comes to data.
Now, you mentioned some of those red flags when it comes to that, but some people would argue that this type of technology can do more good than harm. So it's ultimately a good tool. How do you respond to that kind of comment?
Well, for all of human history, there is methods of doing things, and the things can be a placeholder. But all of human history, there's processes and there's technology that's constantly being innovated. So let me just go back a couple hundred years. There was scribes before the printing press. People would scribe or transcribe documents from one to the next. That was the photocopy. And then as technology innovates, it's used to create efficiencies. That's a really good thing because you can do it for much cheaper and mass produce certain publications. So the technology itself is agnostic to being good or bad. But with every technology, there are always ethical considerations. And so when it comes to this, you're spot on. The proponents of facial recognition technology are correct. There are good applications of it. But just like any technology, it can be used for evil purposes, and that might be a little bit of a strong word. In some cases, it would be evil, but others, it would just be unethical, or the definition of good versus bad is relative. Because I personally, one who stands for individual privacy, I don't want my facial features captured without affirmative consent. That to me is unethical. Somebody else with a different standard would say that's perfectly fine. And that's the continuum we're on. It's this struggle between privacy versus security, liberty versus security. And so they are correct, and that's the dialogue we need to have is on this continuum, where do we slide it? Where's the correct spot in Minnesota to balance individual liberty, civil rights versus government and or security?
I think there's a famous quote about that, freedom versus security. Going back to your bill, Senate File 1242, it has bipartisan support, and that usually, is a good sign for getting it passed. What are your thoughts on its chances this session?
I don't know necessarily about this session, but like many bills, when they're introduced, it may take several sessions in order to communicate, to get dialogue around them, to get awareness, and to build momentum. So whether it be that bill, there are other bills as well that I'm similarly working and have strong bipartisan support. Another one is a proposed constitutional amendment that would add digital data to have the same protections that persons, houses, papers, and effects does in the Fourth Amendment. So it would require, if the government is going to handle digital data, personal data, they have to do so with the same protections as they would for papers, houses, persons, and effects. Another example, bipartisan bill, is a neural rights bill. Now think about this. As technology continues to innovate, the interface, most people are familiar with the human-computer interface right now. It's a keyboard and a mouse and a screen, and then a printer are some of the ways we input data, and then we get data out. But we've seen, whether it be Elon Musk, or Google, or others are looking to create new human-computer interfaces, such as direct brain connections, a neural link, for example. And that technology, it's only a matter of time. So here's the next natural question. When the technology eventually exists where our brain waves or brain thoughts can be captured and translated into digital forms, can that interface be used for unethical or unlawful purposes? When you think about one's mind or thoughts, can a person's thoughts be read without express consent? Will that be an illegal action? Or how about this one? Again, I know this sounds sci-fi, but here's another example of using artificial intelligence or more technology broadly. The movie Inception. where they went into the dream and they planted a thought into somebody's head in a very invasive manner. So when Elon Musk or Google or others that are working to have these human-computer interfaces, can they implant a thought into the head, or can they implant or put brainwaves, and maybe one's thoughts now are not their own? Again, I know this sounds way sci-fi and way out there, but it's only a matter of time, and I think it's much closer than we might think. And so the bill, one of the bills that I have has strong bipartisan support as well, is to ensure that it is a crime to extract somebody's thoughts and or to implant thoughts without their permission. And so, again, there's more bills, but those are just a handful of examples.
Well, you mentioned sci-fi. I love sci-fi, and as you said, the time is you're supposed to get ahead of it before it comes, to put those guardrails in place. So
exactly.
Technology might not be here, but it's good to have the conversation. So we've talked about some of the drawbacks of AI, some of the benefits of AI. Ultimately, do you think it will be a net positive, a net negative at the moment for Minnesota, or is it just impossible to categorize?
It is absolutely going to be a very positive thing, but there are very serious and real dangers and risks, and that's why we need to put these protections in place. So when we think about customizing at a very, very basic level, I'm a coffee drinker, and so if I can have my coffee individualized to me with a certain level of creamer, or a certain level of sweetener, or a certain level of whatever added to it, that's a customized. But now let's take it to the next level. When we think about treatments or prescriptions for certain ailments in the healthcare space, right, there's general, whether it be 5 milligrams, 25 milligrams, 50 milligrams of XYZ pharmaceutical, that is more general. What if, as artificial intelligence can analyze data and come up with a more individualized approach that will be more successful and or more efficient? So there's a cost savings aspect, there's a potential more effectiveness in the healthcare outcome. And so those are examples of very, very positive to our society. So again, whether it be healthcare, whether it be all the applications in our life of using the ability to crunch massive amounts of data to be very specific to the individual and to increase efficiencies, whether it be the private sector or the government. But then again, we come back to that threat to privacy and civil liberty. And when government is using artificial intelligence, whether it be in the law enforcement capacity or whether it be in anything that government does, there are opportunities for discrimination, infringes on civil liberties, because when it comes to these algorithms, somebody has to write them. An algorithm is simply a code. It's a code that's designed to be mimicking the decision making, as I explained earlier. And so somebody's bias, their lived experience, is going to be baked into that code. And so when we have government using that, what potential biases exist when the machine is mimicking the reasoning ability or adapting to certain situations that might be unethical? And then you add in, let's say, the religious aspect to this. When it comes to different decisions that have to be made, how will they potentially infringe on religious liberty? Right? I mean, there's so many aspects to this. It's tough to have a conversation, obviously, in a handful of minutes, but these are very serious conversations as we go forward in the decisions and controls we absolutely need to put in place.
Well, I absolutely appreciate the conversation. Thank you for your time today, Senator.
Thank you so much.
What are your thoughts on AI? Join the conversation by leaving us a comment on our social media pages.
That's all the time we have today. Thank you for joining us, and see you next time.